The year is 1912. We are time tripping. The Titanic sinks. On its maiden voyage, the doomed ship strikes an iceberg and sinks into the depths of the Atlantic, taking more than 1,500 souls to a watery grave.
We are. Bloody hell, Johnny. This is
middle of the Atlantic, and it's not going well for arguably the best ship that had ever been built to date. The Titanic.
And we will be arguing that later.
Sinking.
In Ren's
heading
opinion.
to a watery grave to Jet Davy Jones's locker.
Yeah, I mean, if you
bad turn of events with an iceberg.
If you needed yet another reason to watch our YouTube vidcast, as it's not called, you'll see that we're actually watching the Titanic.
The lifeboats.
That's
not enough of the lifeboats.
Exactly, and that's.
I've got a good quote from this, actually, if you want to hear it.
I was going to say that's when all the lights go off, isn't it?
Yeah, once the ship actually splits in two, lights out,
right down
everyone.
The ship. Many of them chose to stay on.
Yeah, 1,500 souls thereabouts, I believe, perished, which, yeah, was a great tragedy. And
a tragedy.
Elizabeth Shutes, a Titanic passenger, says of this moment.
I beg your pardon, who shot whom?
Elizabeth Shutes, a Titanic passenger. It's her surname, Shutes. She wasn't shooting anyone.
Sorry, a little moment of levity.
Elizabeth Shutes, Titanic passenger, talks about the awful goodbyes, the quiet look of hope in the brave men's eyes as their wives were put into the lifeboats. Nothing escaped one at this fearful moment. We left from the sun deck 75 feet above the water. Mr. Case and Mr. Roebling, brave American men, saw us to the lifeboat, made no effort to save themselves, but stepped back on deck. Later they went to an honoured grave. Our lifeboat with 36 in it began lowering to the sea. This was done amid the greatest confusion, rough seamen all giving different orders, no officer aboard. As only one side of the ropes worked, the lifeboat at one time was in such a position that it seemed we must capsize in mid-air. At last the ropes worked together, and we drew nearer and nearer the black, oily water. The first touch of our lifeboat on that black sea came to me as a last goodbye to life, and so we put off, a tiny boat on a great sea, rowed away from what had been a safe home for 5 days.
Oh, yeah,
Tough.
that really sums it up.
I think it shows well, like, one of the key images of the Titanic sinking is that it's women and children first, men get left behind, all a bit chaotic, like no one really knows what's happening. They've been woken up in the middle of the night, bells ringing, like, oh, bother, something's gone badly wrong. And then it's just like a mad scramble to get to these few lifeboats that are on board.
It seems though like the witness testimony seems to suggest like there were definitely some mad scrambles, which we'll come on to shortly. But there was a very strange air of calm and serenity, equally, of people sort of silently standing by to go on lifeboats. And well, I suppose that's very much towards the end. I mean, it takes, I think, 3 hours to sink. So a lot of drama is played out in that time, to quote your sort of Jim Cameron style thing.
It's not a fast sinking, that's for sure. It does take a while. And perhaps, the enormity doesn't strike immediately, because you still got people, like, running around in their pyjamas and, like, going back to their rooms for a bit, and, like, not really, perhaps, grasping the full magnitude of the situation to begin with. But, once the first lifeboats start hitting the water, I'm pretty sure, people are beginning to get a bit scared, a bit frantic. But then, as you say, you've got like a stiff upper lip mentality going on with the officers and the men to some extent.
Yeah, which actually brings me on neatly to a guy I'm going to talk about, one of the two wireless operators in their 20s. You had Bride and Phillips, sent by the Marconi company to operate the then pretty novel wireless tech. So the captain sent them orders, and they sent off telegrams and letters, and in this case, distress calls. Basically, I wanted to zoom in a little bit on Bride. So basically, the wireless operators are working tirelessly until they're, they could easily be electrocuted because the water's so high, but tirelessly sending out distress signals and SOS to sort of ships that were nearest to it. And I think they even by the end actually tried out Morse code for the very first, not Morse code, SOS for the very first time. What was it previously? Help, come quickly.
You mean the Morse code, the SOS, the ... ..
Yeah, but what came before? They were using an older one, and then the captain said when it was clear they were sinking, like, "Come on, chaps, you know this is your only chance. You're going to get to use this new SOS."
Newfangled help code. Yeah. Well, we discussed that just in our end of the first decade wrap up, didn't we? That I can't remember what year it was. Maybe 1909 that SOS came into use. So yeah, very recent development.
Of course.
Not, of course, meaning save our souls or save our ships. That is anachronistic. It's just simple, easy to remember. ... .. dash 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 ... or ... ... dash dash. I can't remember.
The rhythm and the rhythm of it means that on hearing it, it can only be a human-made noise, right? Like the beating of a heart. But in this case, of course, the ship was sinking too quickly. The iceberg had done that much damage, so it got to the point where the captain said to these two young men, "You know, I'd release you, every man for himself. Such is the way in this kind of a time." So he then went off to die on the bridge, Captain Smith, and these two guys had their life vests on. Bride, this is by an account given in the New York Times, because Bride survived, though Phillips did not. But apparently there was a guy, like a stoker, who Bride saw trying to steal Phillips's life vest off his back, like in a very ninja style. And he then is quoted as sort of saying that, you know, he was not going to let the man die a decent sailor's death for doing such a thing, and that they sort of did their duty and dealt with him. The passage really suggesting that probably they killed him in that moment. But then this never came up again when he's interviewed in the two subsequent inquiries, one US one, which I'm looking forward to coming on to, because it differs so much in tone and sort of in findings with the later British one. From then on, sort of, you know, if you look on Encyclopedia Titanica, which is quite a good source for all this kind of thing, they sort of flag it up as being, you know, no one's really sure what happened, whether it was just a brief scrap with the stoker. Equally, the New York Times, as we'll come to, was really naughty in the aftermath, in sort of inflating the facts and trying to make the Bruce Ismay look as silly as possible.
I think it is, yeah, definitely got something to it, like a sort of murder on the Titanic as it goes down.
Yeah. Of which
there were some people who claimed to have heard various gunshots going off, and like the crew of the ship pointing revolvers, mainly I think to try to restore some sort of calmness to proceedings, to show that they had some authority, to prevent it from descending into a mad free-for-all, people all going for these few lifeboats. I've got one interesting character from the staff called Charles Lightoller.
Yes.
And he was like the most senior guy who managed to get off the ship. He did actually go down with the ship, but had a lucky escape. We can find out how he escaped exactly.
And just to say, so did Bride. It's funny how all of them have the most miraculous escapes to avoid, perhaps, accusations of cowardice. We'll come to all that, though.
Well, Lightoller was definitely taking charge of the situation and doing his very best to ensure that all the women and children got off first. There is actually some criticism of him, though, because he was almost too stringent in this women and children order only. So he was actually responsible for sending out a few of these lifeboats with only women and children on them, when they were men waiting around and no more women and children, but he was saying no, women and children only, not allowing any men whatsoever to get in.
I believe it was, and it wasn't even an official policy per se. Apparently, it was sort of just the natural law. It's just almost what you do in that situation. But yeah, because there was no proper training in what you did in that sort of emergency, it was just, as you say, pretty chaotic. And as you say, lifeboats left half filled, and there being only enough lifeboats for half the passengers to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think actually Lightoller, because he was threatening people with his revolver, which was unloaded, but when he found that lifeboat number 2 was occupied already by 25 male passengers and crewmen, he ordered them all out the boat, pointing his revolver, shouting,
Oh, wow.
"Get out of there, you damned coward! I'd like to see every one of you overboard." So, yeah, maybe he went a bit too hard with this women and children only line.
There's also, I think, some of the sort of slightly conflicting accounts come from actually Lightoller and the chap I just talked about, Bride. They actually got into a bit of a sparring match in the newspapers, I think in the 20s or 30s, about little details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there were so many little details that people were picking up on and trying to catch out.
It was an exploding boiler, wasn't it? I think that's the same way Bride went out.
Lightoller fires up like a champagne cork out from the depths of the sea. Davy Jones releases him.
Exactly.
Onto the real lifeboats, the ones that were surviving.
And one of those people on Collapsible B, Mr. Bride, the one surviving wireless operator, who was with Lightoller, I think, or near him, and was also popped out by the boiler, and he found himself underneath Collapsible B and nearly drowned. So yeah, that's a nice little link up. Good thing we planned it that way, Johnny. I will say one thing though, something that comes up, right, so basically with this thing, just by virtue of being a man and surviving, given the loss of life, etc., is a big problem, such a mark of shame, especially given the laws of the time and so on. So I do notice, especially men and crewmen who survived often have such miraculous escapes that you wonder if perhaps they've embroidered them a bit to be I wanted to go down with the ship, but then I was popped out by, I'm not trying to, because God knows, all this could have happened, but it's quite interesting. As with a lot of big bits of popular history, nothing is quite as it seems, especially given the amount of film adaptations.
That's true. I mean, Mr. Lightoller himself actually did credit God with saving him, saying, "With God, all things are possible." So crediting some divine power for his survival. But yeah, it does seem unlikely that you get popped out. But yeah, I've never been on a sinking cruise liner, so
it's so easy to judge.
Can't really comment whether it's possible or not.
And of course, that comes up when they get to New York, and this populist senator immediately drags a load of witnesses who've only been on land a couple of days to quite an aggressive inquiry. Exactly, and they get really grilled about an incident that happened. That with the trauma, you might have misremembered so many details. Especially Bruce Ismay was dragged up and really thrashed over for his part. And we'll come to Bruce Ismay.
I mean, shall we mention a bit who Bruce Ismay is for those who are not clued up on the ownership of the Titanic?
Absolutely, Johnny, and I think we should do that in the Celestial Cinema. Lovely. So we're in our Time Tripper cinema in space, watching Captain JZH's Titanic Tropes. Bruce Ismay escapes. So this is, Johnny, every permutation of Bruce Ismay, who was the managing director of White Star Line, the sort of mogul behind Titanic and similar ships, and he who sort of has lived in ignominy, accusations of cowardice. He's your man with the moustache in Titanic who sort of gets on the boat. So we're going to watch a little bit on YouTube while we chat about him. What do you think about Bruce Ismay, Johnny?
I think he was quite culpable, certainly, for things like not enough lifeboats. He should have taken that on board when designing his ships, or when being presented with the ship's plan. He should have said, 20 lifeboats may be the bare minimum that are required by nautical law, but I want to have enough for all of my passengers. I don't think you can excuse him for that, certainly.
So as you say, it was law, and thus sort of kind of standard practice. So I'm not saying it's good, but is it Ismay's fault, or is it more a failure?
Well, he was very vain about his ship. He wanted it to look really good, and I think one of the reasons why he didn't want to clutter the deck with lifeboats was just to make it look good when it was in the pictures and launching off, and to have this very opulent, aesthetically pleasing, new age dreamliner type thing. And yeah, no place for life-saving devices in the nice clean lines that he had in his mind.
But are you sure that Ismay himself was responsible for that decision? I'm not.
Yeah, maybe not, but
was,
like ultimately it was perhaps the ship's designer, but he was the one signing off on all the blueprints, and he could have been a bit more safety-minded, perhaps. Just saying.
He wasn't an engineer though. He was just a sort of producer who went on the maiden voyage. So basically, I mentioned the New York Times. When they washed up in New York, the New York Times editor, William Randolph Hearst, who already had a real vendetta against Bruce Ismay, plus an American public really baying for the blood of what the British done now. They've kind of killed off a big portion of American high society and more besides. So that's my way of throwing down a little gauntlet and saying, poor Bruce was unfairly villainised.
Okie dokie. I did hear that this lane was acknowledged as like Iceberg Alley, and it was peak iceberg season, and there were some other ships in the vicinity on that night who decided not to go ahead and just weighed anchor, whereas Ismay was alleged to have given the order to go like full steam ahead, let's get to New York and prove that we're not only a luxurious liner but also a fast liner. And it was him steaming on through the night, or his idea to steam on through the night, that caused them to plough into this iceberg.
What is the source for that, do you think? No, there's one passenger who claimed she overheard him. It's never really been corroborated, and there's a lot of things that just don't quite add up with the accusation against it.
History repeats itself, repeats itself. History repeats itself, repeats itself. History repeats itself, repeats itself. First as a tragedy, then as a farce. Repeats itself, repeats itself.
So yes, Ismay has come under fire, I would say, and it's always this idea that he sort of, some say he bribed his way onto a lifeboat. A couple of others did, of course, we'll come to them. Others say that he was like first in a lifeboat with a sort of 10 other millionaires sneaking off. Actually, he maintained, and witnesses actually corroborated, that he was in one of the last lifeboats to leave the sort of, top deck. But actually that he was in with a load of third class passengers, and he was helping, like basically grabbing women and children and hurling them into lifeboats. And in the end, once he was on his boat, you can really feel his trauma at that 2 days later inquiry.
Right. Right. Well, he wouldn't have got on a boat had Mr.
He couldn't look at it, Johnny. Around. He couldn't look at it. I think he would, though. He'd just say, "I'm Ismay." He wouldn't have been on it. Oh, if lights on.
I did hear
wasn't the one enforcing the absurd only women and children thing, right?
He was, enforcing that rule. So he might have made an exception for the head honcho of the Titanic.
But he allowed men on if practical, as we were discussing, because obviously there wasn't time to get everyone off. We'll come to that, which class was stuck down below.
Yeah, I did hear that once he was rescued by the Carpathia, once he was on that, he was just like out of it completely. He was inconsolable with what had happened, and was strung out on opiates for the remainder of the journey, and didn't come out of his room at all. Which, understandable, he must have felt an awful lot of guilt and responsibility for the way
the Titanic
went down.
He testified in the Senate inquiry. He couldn't look back at the ship. He was rowing, and he deliberately sort of couldn't watch it go down, whereas other people described those final moments, seeing people go down with it.
Yeah, well, it is very much his reputation and his career going down, along with, of course, a big monetary investment. I believe
Ismay go down in his gown. Anyway, you get the idea. This is the most famous one, of course. I think is that light on her there? Anyway, not good podcasting, that. Very visual, that little tiny bit I just said there. Down he goes. Bye-bye, Ismay. We're talking to fictional Ismay.
Do you know who I do really like, who goes down in style? And that is the Titanic's head baker, Charles
Well,
Joffin.
Johnny, if I may, before you tell the story, if there's something you really like, the time machine gets sort of pulled to your favourite things. So, here's Johnny's favourite things.
So, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, my favourite Titanic survivor.
Did you see it?
Yeah. I didn't realise he had to do the full intro, but okay. So without a shadow of a doubt, my favourite Titanic survivor is the chief baker, Charles Joffin. And he's got quite a story and quite a survival instinct to him. Because when he goes down, he's basically nonchalantly stepping off the stern of the sinking liner. Everyone else is throwing themselves off or trying to scramble for a lifeboat at this point, panicking. But he waits to the very last moment and, just more or less walks off into the water and then calmly paddles around until dawn, like defying all logic and science, because you should freeze after, a few minutes in such icy water. But he's been paddling around for almost 2 hours before he's fished out. How?
How?
Well, between helping passengers onto the lifeboats, at some points he testifies we literally threw them in, and between heaving deck chairs overboard as sort of makeshift flotation devices, and between stocking the lifeboats with his freshly baked bread and biscuits, he was helping himself to the pantry supplies of liquor and nipping off to his cabin for little shots. And the theory is that he was so drunk by the time he went into the water that his alcohol blood level was high enough to actually prevent him from freezing as much. Whether or not this actually has any effect is debatable, but the fact is he did survive for a much longer time than to be expected, just paddling around in the water. Part of it could be because he was so calm, and they think that the alcohol may have calmed him down a lot, so rather than like thrashing about and trying to swim over to the nearest lifeboat or panicking at all, he was just basically treading water in a drunken state, very calmly.
How long did he stay?
Warmed up by all the liquor as well, and in the end he sort of manages to paddle over to, again, I guess this lifeboat collapsible B, and cling onto
I
it.
don't think he was on collapsible B. There's holes there.
Was he not?
I think there's
Okay.
holes in his story.
He was definitely on an overturned lifeboat. Maybe it wasn't
Holes in
collapsible
his
B.
story.
And when he was fished out, he was essentially fine, barring some swelling in his feet and a bit of a chill. But I think the fact that he managed to delay immersion by riding the ship down, literally riding it down and stepping off into the water, by getting absolutely wasted as well, to keep warm, and by managing to stay calm and sort of strategizing his way out of the water, not thrashing around but gently paddling around and then finding a lifeboat. All of that helped him to become sort of a textbook example of how to survive a shipwreck.
Hang on a second, a textbook example. Drink loads and eat some cakes and then sort of ride it down. It can't, if indeed what he says, if his account is true,
He was indeed a textbook example, because he delayed immersion, he didn't panic, and he managed to raise his body temperature by drinking a
So
lot.
after the inquiry, when they decided on new regulations to avoid the catastrophe happening again, every ship was stocked with sort of hard liquor behind breakable glass.
Yeah, a break case in the break glass in case of emergency.
I mean, maybe it's time for a little rent opinion though, now we're all riled up. We're not really. So here we are in the big brain arena for a bout of rent opinion. The rules are simple. We will each be rented out an opinion. Both opinions will be extreme. Then we'll swap opinions. That's it. This week, Titanic, best ship ever in the whole world, or worst ship ever in the whole world? Johnny will be arguing for worst.
I think Titanic was a rubbish ship because it only had a single sheet metal hull where it could have had two to prevent it sinking. Didn't have nearly enough lifeboats, only had 20 rather than the recommended 48, which would have helped all passengers escape.
If I may, Johnny, let me just get you deserve a big point for your first answer. You've really hit the weak point, the weakest point in the Titanic, because who argue it's a great ship, like I do. Right, you're getting 5 points for that. If I may rent my opinion, Titanic, the best ship in the world. Yes, I do take issue with your point about the lifeboats, because I know that she should have had more, but it was the law. It was sort of the law. It was the law. Just the law.
It was the bare minimum. They went for the bare minimum.
Ship of
to make it look
dreams.
good.
She was the ship of dreams.
What was so dreamy about her, though?
Oh, she had beautiful Turkish baths, which was so erotic that they offended an elderly first-class passenger who sort of felt violated by them. She was so beautifully designed. The staterooms were superb. She was beautiful, and actually she was a lot better engineered than people give her credit for. This was a big iceberg. It was this was a big iceberg, and although she actually, because the unsinkable thing is, the idea that she's unsinkable comes from Ismay sort of saying, she is the lifeboat, because she was designed so well that she had, X number of compartments and could actually survive a head-on collision with ice. Unfortunately, she couldn't survive a sort of glancing scraping blow,
swipe.
The side swipe that kind of took out.
Iceberg, eh?
Absolutely. So actually, she was a brilliant and very safe ship that would never sink.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'd say it's probably about 12. What's going to be the knockout question? Swap opinions. Titanic is the worst ship ever made, and she is a disgusting symbol of decadent excess, the end of the Gilded Age, drowning in the blood of the proletariat, a fitting entry into the First World War and the breakdown of this complacent British Empire.
I think Titanic is great because it had a lovely ballroom.
Yeah.
Modelled on a London ballroom, perhaps? I believe a famous London ballroom.
Famous London.
Mr. Ismay liked it a lot, so he said, I want that ballroom in my ship. And even when going down, people are still having a little bit of fun, the music was going.
I don't know about fun.
Maybe not fun. The music was going, they were admiring this ballroom, thinking, if I had to have a last dance, it would be here.
Yeah, I believe an elderly couple did that, didn't they? They actually danced in the ballroom until they went down. Did you enjoy renting those opinions?
I mildly enjoyed it, yeah.
Mildly?
Yeah, I can see myself maybe adopting some of those opinions more strongly in my day-to-day life.
Excellent. Well, let's get back to the time machine.
Do you know a story that I do like a lot? A certain Bridget Delia McDermott. She was a third-class passenger, and her entire group had been cut off from the lifeboats to the point where they're, below decks, and a few of them are scaling out parts of the ship to reach the boat deck. Miss McDermott among them. And she was able to find and just about board a lifeboat until she'd realised that she'd left her fancy new hat behind in her cabin. So she leaves this guaranteed safety of the lifeboat, goes back below decks, like through the chaotic, flooding third class, finds her hat, rescues it, and makes it back up to the deck to find another lifeboat, and she survives the sinking. Must have been a heck of a hat.
Hell of a hat. Maybe it was a flotation hat of a kind.
Sombrero style. Yeah. Turn it upside down and ride in it.
There was also the second class passenger who sort of got put in a crappy little cab room and spent the sort of voyage complaining about it and getting swapped, and even during the sinking was complaining about, you know, how you couldn't swing a cat in her room and it was too hot. And then one of the first things when they got picked up, when she came across other second class Titanic survivors, was to inquire what sort of rooms they had on the ship. And she even talked, no women were allowed to testify at the inquiry, the American one. They were sort of spared the blushes, but yeah, it was mentioned. I really need to read.
Much was is lost. We are time tripping, for I can see what is to come. We are time tripping. Much that once was is lost. Go back, learn the lessons. It is the only way to avoid catastrophe.
Hello. Would you like to hear about another passenger?
Yeah.
A little boy called Douglas Spedden. He would become sort of one of the faces of the Titanic. He was a young lad, only 12, I want to say. Oh no, even younger than that, 6 years old. First class passenger. He goes to sleep in his first class comfy bed and doesn't wake up again until he's in a lifeboat. The sleepy lad managed to sort of snore his way through being evacuated and had absolutely no realisation until he wakes up that the boat has sunk and the great tragedy has befallen him. But he's sort of portrayed as this sort of symbol of innocence in the face of this great tragedy. And his mother writes a little book about him and his teddy bear called Polar, and it sells quite well actually, this book. It's the human face of the tragedy, a little boy sleeping through while all of this is unravelling. Unfortunately for him, it's got like a Final Destination twist to this tale. Have you seen the film Final Destination?
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about then. Death will catch up with him because a few years later, another form of transport, the automobile, strikes young Douglas down in Maine while he chased a ball into a nearby street. So a cautionary tale there. You can escape a sinking ship, but you got to be careful and not chase your ball into the street.
I'm not sure it is a cautionary tale, though. Is it? What should he have... Anyway, yeah.
The caution is not to chase your ball into the street, not to fall asleep on a sinking ship and hope everything will be all right.
I actually saw in... We'll dip into the newspapers shortly, but there was a lot of hula hooping accidents going on. This is late 19th century, actually. Children chasing hoops. The hoop menace, one letter writer described it as. Running into the path of horses and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, your focus is just on the hoop, and you're not expecting a horse, or even less, one of these newfangled automobiles to come careening around the corner and crush your hoop, and maybe worse.
And then, of course, there were survivors who were kids at the Titanic who sort of remember it all very, very clearly, just being like woken up and popped in a lifeboat. Of course, the women and children...
Definitely better to have been a first-class child, though, because only one first-class child died compared to, I think, 50 plus, 52 or 53 second and third-class children.
Yeah, there was a few factors for that, weren't there? I mean, obviously, it is actually... overplayed the idea that, for example, that they locked the third class down below when they knew the ship was sinking wasn't true. Like, they were already locked down. They were already locked down below as a sort of immigration requirement that third class passengers be isolated, quarantined from the rest of the ship. They did open the gates once they could, but still so many died just from being so far down there. Yeah. Also a lot of women and children not wanting to leave their men. They're like kind of, you know, in that era, their only hope of any sort of life, really, their primary caregiver. It was very much harder for women to do much else at this point. We're nearly on the cusp of some big change for that. And there's a lot of social change going on at the moment, don't forget.
Finish your mission and return to the mothership for your debrief. Hurry, time trippers. Time waits for no man.
I'm quite intrigued by some of the stories of what happens to people after the Titanic and what they go on to do with their second chance at life after a near escape from the icy waters of the Atlantic. Have you heard of a Violet Jessup? Sometimes referred to as the unsinkable Violet Jessup.
I've heard of the unsinkable Molly Brown, but go for it.
Well, this one, I believe, was even more unsinkable than Molly Brown, old Violet. She's actually had a near miss before on a ship where she was working on, and ships collided, but it didn't sink. Then, of course, she gets onto the Titanic. She signs up as a stewardess, and all is going well until, of course, it begins to sink. But no worries for Violet; she manages to get off. She's not perturbed by this, though, and signs up again to the one of the sister ships of the Titanic, the Britannic, which is, when war breaks out, outfitted as a hospital ship, and she's cruising around the Aegean Sea on the way to Gallipoli to be a nurse when the ship hits a mine. And again, she's into the lifeboats and evacuated. And there's a terrifying bit in her memoirs where the ship is sinking and the propellers are still spinning, and the other lifeboats are getting minced and chopped up by this massive propeller. Violet leaps out at the last minute and manages to survive her second and a half sinking in the space of a few years. But yeah, despite this, she continues to work on ships for pretty much the rest of her life until she retires from ships in like her 50s.
No, I mean, I would just say that, of course, because the wreck, as we know, went up to the absolute most bottom of the ocean and was not seen or heard from again until the late 1980s, there was a real sense of enduring kind of mystery. For years, it was like they'd all sort of gone off on a ghost ship to another dimension. And yeah, it took a long time, of course, for them to find it. Yeah, the US Senate inquiry was a lot more heavy-handed with the White Star Line and so on. The British inquiry was portrayed in the States as being a little bit of a whitewash, although it was much, much more thorough and much, much longer than the US one. So it's actually seen as quite a reliable taking apart of the whole business. Do you fancy having a quick look at the newspapers, seeing what else is going on in 1912?
Yeah.
Could do with going to a disco.
Not a disco in the Royal Titanic ballroom, though.
No. Maybe in one of the many sort of duplicitecture Titanics that shady billionaires keep threatening to build, which are presumably probably big fraudulent things. Maybe I'd go on one of those. Actually, I've talked myself out of it. Right, so 1912. Welcome to tomorrow's fish and chip trip. Oh, man, let's call it something else. Welcome to the news review, 1912.
Old
How's
news,
that?
we could call it.
Old news travels slow. Old news is good, actually. Let's stick with that. Let me just try this shitty browser issue. I'm just going to do it on my browser, and I'll put the image in later.
Old news, new views.
Old news, new views. I think I prefer old news.
Just old news, short and punchy.
Whoops. Okay. 1912. Let's blast back to the newsroom, to Fleet Street. Johnny, give me a region of the United Kingdom, please.
How about Devon?
Devon it is. What's today's date of recording?
The 26th of November.
Then let us head to the 26th of November 1912. To Devon. Pretty exciting.
Absolutely nothing happened.
No, nothing's going to happen on that thing. I put that in post. Let's get our camera up though. Yeah. So that's. But I've got it up here, so to speak. We need Devon. What region's Devon? Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
Southwest England. So let's have a little look at the Tiverton Gazette, Mid-Devon Gazette, Tuesday the 26th of November 1912. So we're going to have a little quick look here at the front cover first. Oh, lovely. Tea, dinner and toilet sets in exclusive patterns and second to none. Christmas poultry wanted. Larger quantities than ever before of turkeys, geese, ducks and fowls. Oh,
Yummy.
Very Dickensian. Is there any news on this? I don't think so. I think it's just personals and ads, really. Cook wanted. Bampton Christmas market. Rabbit snares. Alexandra oil, safest, sweetest and best. Should we have a little look at one of the nationals, Johnny, and probably abandon that regional element? Just sort of holds things up.
As I say, probably not much going on in the relative backwater of Devon.
Exactly, and I chose a silly paper. So let's get rid of Devon. And get on our way to heaven. Daily Mirror, Friday the 1st of November 1912. Let's go with that. Daily Mirror has these beautiful images, which I'll put up now for our viewers. Sorry you can't see it at the moment, Johnny. It's the way of things for the minute. So, Johnny, Tsar Ferdinand, the warlord of the Balkans, attends an impressive service of thanksgiving for Bulgaria's victories. So this is all build up to World War I, isn't it? In 1912. Some amazing photos of that going on. Trouble in the Balkans, Bulgaria, Albania, etc. Everything's building up.
The Ottoman Empire against the Russians, I guess. Russian influence spreading.
And the Austro-Hungarian Empire will soon pop in. So lovely, that's front page. Let's have something a little nicer. Oh, here we go. We've got a nice sexist advert. Ready today, the most artistic magazine for ladies. Ladies' World. 3D. Contains the continuation of a charming new serial story entitled A Doubtful Character by Mrs. Bailey Reynolds. New fashions profusely illustrated, complete stories, drama. A handsome gift of a beautiful and unique transfer of a yoke for a child's frock will be given away free with this number.
Nice. Free frocks. Can't turn your nose up at that.
Free frocks, Ottoman geopolitical shocks, and one more that rhymes. Not the word you're thinking of, not in this age, not unless we're describing daddy chickens.
Well, thinking what's going on with the clocks. The clock's ticking.
So we've got lots of Turkish army being routed, everything going on. We've got London ambulance men in Montenegro. So the British really putting it about all around the world, winding everything up a little bit. As are all the empires, of course. At this point, London launderers to take no more domestics linen by contract. Britain's growing aerial fleet. This links right back to our 1903 Wright brothers. Government to establish coast bases for warplanes, armoured air cruisers. When war is declared against this country, this is 1912, don't forget, said a famous British naval officer yesterday, we shall have to secure immediately the supremacy of the air, just as we now have supremacy at sea. War in the air will be a terrible, ghastly business, and it is absolutely essential we should be prepared to strike the first and the victorious blow.
Goodness, they've only been airborne, well, less than 10 years, and they're already thinking about weaponising this new tech.
It does sound a bit suspiciously like our Winston Churchill. It might just have been the voice I did, but
I'm sure
I bet he was
thinking along similar lines.
Lovely. Any further questions on the newspapers?
I don't have the actual newspaper article, but I did read about the 1912 Olympics that were going on around this time. And there was one relatively amusing anecdote from the Greco-Roman wrestling. I mean, it's always amusing enough to see Greco-Roman wrestling when you got the two chaps just going at it, so to speak, trying to throw each other to the ground. But the final of the Greco-Roman wrestling went on for a whole 9 hours, and no winner was decided after many sweaty, grubby minutes rolling around on the mat. They couldn't separate the pair, so to speak, and so just awarded 2 silver medals instead. No gold.
Blimey. Yeah, I don't have that in the Olympics anymore, do they? The old Greco-Roman business.
No, actually, I think they might have a form of it. I mean, they're not maybe like in the real Greco-Roman style of oiled up and naked anymore, but you know, there's not much between the skin and the leotard.
Gonna have a little quick check. Olympic, is wrestling a sport? No.
No.
Yeah, I know it's professional wrestling. No, like WWF.
Like WWF.
No, I know.
Like the Undertaker
Neither
is going to go up against Mankind.
But yeah, they do. They do have it still. Greco-Roman wrestling.
Yes, you were clearly thinking of like, I don't know, SmackDown.
No, it wasn't me. It was
wrestling.
Google. Google was characteristically misleading.
Hurry, time trippers.
Shall we go back to the Titanic?
Yeah. Hang on a sec. Isn't that a line from the film Titanic? Should we go back to Titanic?
Well,
Not like
actually, I mean, I'm sure it was said by some of the people in the boats. But yeah, there are some controversies around this because
in the movie,
lifeboats could have gone back and like paddled around looking for survivors, but a lot of them didn't want to.
No, for
They
fear
said
of
no
overwhelming.
turning back. We row onwards, even if they could hear the shrieking and howls. They, head down, row for the horizon, sort of thing.
Yeah, they knew there were just so many people in the water that they feared that going near would swamp the boats and kill everyone in them.
Yeah.
I think was it Lightoller, in fact, who was the only one who went back in the boat.
Not sure.
Is anyone alive out there? Can anyone hear me?
I think you're just throwing out the name of Lightoller for anyone who does anything from the crew's perspective.
I know I'm pretty sure. Well, I'll have a quick check on that one, but carry on.
So yeah, I might just cover a couple more of the survivors' stories because there are so many that you can pick out. But one of the more fascinating ones is Dorothy Gibson. And she was a star of the very first Titanic film that was made literally weeks afterwards. She'd already been like silent film star and model for magazine covers when she was boarding the ship. She was quite famous and was as surprised as anyone to find it sinking. But yeah, literally weeks after the Titanic had sunk, she met up with her movie producer lover, Jules Brulator, and he convinced her to star in the very first Titanic film. And I can imagine it would have been like really quite traumatic for her to be like literally reliving this terrifying experience weeks after, and maybe she was using it as like a form of therapy to get through it and acting out all these terrible scenes again. Maybe she was cashing in. Some people did accuse her of like using this event to just basically flog her new film.
Fair
The
enough.
startling story of the world's greatest sea disaster is a sensation of the country, declared the Moving Picture News. Miss Dorothy Gibson, a heroine of the shipwreck and one of the most talked-of survivors, tells in this motion picture masterpiece of the enthralling tragedy among the icebergs. She does say, though, that she was profoundly affected and did grieve the sinking of the Titanic, but she had the opportunity to pay tribute to those who gave their lives on that awful night. That is all I tried to do.
So, Johnny, we can only bring back one item each from the past. What have you brought back from the Titanic?
Do you remember the little sleepy lad, Douglas Spedden, who slept his way through the disaster, went to sleep in his first-class cabin and woke up in a lifeboat?
Yes.
Well, he had a polar bear toy with him.
Oh.
That his mother made famous by writing a book of the experiences in which the polar bear featured. I've nabbed this polar bear off Douglas and taken it back with me because I think it's a nice little symbol of survival and like the children going first, at least.
Absolutely, ideally, yes. Well, I've brought back something very different, possibly the most valuable item on the Titanic. It's the heart of the ocean, it's called. It's a sort of...
I
sapphire.
wanted the heart of the ocean as well.
Well, there's only one in existence, and I've got it. But I thought the old lady tossed it in the ocean at the end.
Well, I secretly wanted the drawing that Jack did.
Is that what you were going to bring back originally?
I couldn't find it. It was nowhere to be seen. But I remember going to the Titanic as a young whippersnapper. It was a 12 when they had the ratings 12, not 12A, so 12, and I couldn't have been much older than 10, maybe 11. Anyway, I was definitely in there illegally, and it was the first time that I'd seen a pair of boobies on such a big screen, and that stuck with me for a very long time.
Great.
Wonderful memory.
Definitely not putting that in.